Trigger warning viewers, you've entered a very unsafe space. This is Mark Latham's Outsiders, Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs program. We give you the information straight. There's no list of words that we can't use, no list of subjects that we can't report on and inform you about. This is straight talk without any editorial control. We're out there on the streets, we're talking to people, we're gathering information, and here on Facebook live streaming on this Wednesday night, we bring it to you with a whole range of interesting subjects in the hour ahead. We'll be talking later on about the federal budget, some of the absurdities in the Australian Labor Party with Bill Shorten's ridiculous 457 advertisement, one of our pin-up boys for absurdity in Australian politics, sneering Sam Dastyari, out there sneering at humble homes in Western Sydney. What's happened to modern Labor when they look down their nose at people who live in accommodation that's humble, and hard workers are being sneered at by the likes of Dastyari. We'll have Corrine Barraclough later on to talk about issues with the Child Support Agency, white ribbon, domestic violence, waste of money in certain areas. She's an expert in those fields, working for the Daily Telegraph and also writing for the Spectator Australia. I value very much the fact that you're watching us tonight. We're a program that doesn't have big resources behind us. We don't have the billion-dollar budget of the ABC. Most of it's wasted, of course, the poor old taxpayer funding that junk. And we don't have trade unions supporting us like Get Up, the left-wing outfit, or George Soros, who's said to support Get Up. We rely on your support. If you can back us, please go to the support page, support.marklathamsoutsiders.com. If you can kick the can, help us cover the cost. The bills come in for this show. We need your support to keep going week after week to give you the news, information, the opinion that you just don't hear in the mainstream media. So it's support.marklathamsoutsiders.com. If you can throw in a few bob, it's greatly appreciated. We also have the website going. I'm getting tremendous feedback about the website as a resource for information about identity politics, the culture wars, all the loss of Australian values in our institutions, how we can fight back. And that's www.marklathamsoutsiders.com. Go to the website to have a look at all the information. Thanks again for your support. We've got a great introduction to the show, because one of the things that Alan Jones always points out is that we hear about the school debate, we pay our taxes, we fund the school system, the government school system, but we don't know in detail what happens in the classroom. And in Western Sydney in recent months, there have been some very disturbing reports about Islamic radicalisation and threats in the classroom, reports that really go to the heart of our security and safety as citizens, the worry about Islamic radicalisation. We've got a very special guest for security reasons. She's using the pseudonym Mrs. A, but she's been working in government schools in the Bankstown district, has had direct experience with radicalisation and threats in the classroom. So Mrs. A, welcome to the show. Thanks for telling your story. You're very brave, and what you've got to say is very powerful and important. Australia needs to hear your story. And we're joined by Tanveer Ahmed, psychiatrist practicing in Western Sydney, also a very impressive voice for the reform of Islam. And I can give a little plug for Tanveer. If you've got a spare weekend to read a mini classic, a book that really, really does talk importantly about issues in Australia, you've got to read Fragile Nation. It's about how we've become a nation of fragility rather than resilience. The old Australian traditions of strength have been lost in the schools, in the mental health arena, a whole range of issues there. A wonderful book. Tanveer, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me, Mark.
Now, Mrs. A, you've had direct experience with these issues in our schools in the Bankstown district. We won't name the schools, but they were primary schools. You're a classroom teacher. You've seen it up close. Tell us what happened.
Yes, I've been a primary school teacher for nearly 10 years in the Bankstown area, well, primarily in the Bankstown area. I've noticed significant changes over the last 10 years. A couple of years ago, well, 2014 to be precise, I was subjected to some quite radical behaviour from Muslim students.
How old were these students?
These students were in years 5 and 6.
Right, and were they boys?
Predominantly boys.
Predominantly boys,
most
yep.
were boys.
Uh-huh.
Yep, and it started occurring probably around March of 2014, and it was becoming quite heightened as ISIS was emerging overseas. Mm-hmm. We would watch some programs at school, one of them being the ABC Behind the News program, which tended to have a bit of a sympathetic voice towards ISIS. So I noticed that whenever I was watching these shows in the class, which we are allowed to watch in class. It's authorised by the New South Wales DET to watch this show. Whenever these shows would come on, and if there was a segment about ISIS or something to do with Islam, the behaviour seemed to have heightened. So I actually stopped watching it altogether. But some of the things that I was subjected to was I had students coming into class flying flags from overseas, be it the Syrian flag and possibly the ISIS flag.
It looked to you like
it looked to me like the ISIS flag.
Right.
There was one occasion where a couple of boys had come to school wearing T-shirts that appeared to be have the ISIS flag or wording that was related to ISIS. There was one incident where a group of our students had actually circled me up against a wall and started chanting the Quran to me. That was quite scary, and it wasn't only scary for me, but it was also quite intimidating for the other students that were in the classroom. The other students were actually quite frightened
These
by
are non-Islamic
non-Islamic and Islamic
right,
students, because
right.
some of the really some good students were saying to me, who are Muslim students, that they were saying, "Miss, they're chanting the Quran," and they were actually chanting at the boys, saying, "You can't do that. You shouldn't be doing that." And the children did not want to repeat to me what had been said. So because they were actually surprised themselves at how horrible the wording was that was being said to me. And then towards the end of the year, probably came the worst threat, which I found was it was discovered by another teacher, and it was handed to me, and it was a note telling me to fuck you, Mrs. and what my name is, and fuck your family. So the threat was actually directed towards my family, which was quite scary, and I had to advise my family of that. And from then on, there were just constant incidents of particular students sitting in class, and if they didn't like something that was being said to them, they would sit there and they would be doing this to me, constantly threatening to behead me. They would sit at the back of the class.
So there was no doubt in your mind that...
No doubt in my mind. Look, sometimes they would even say, make comments that, you know, I can do this to you. And they would be, you know, quite threatening and intimidating. Now, people say, oh, these are only primary school students, or these are only students that are aged between 10 and possibly 13. But I don't know if people are aware of how worldly our children are today, and that, you know, a lot of innocence is gone with our children due to a lot of factors. And yeah, these students are quite aware of what they're doing.
And within the school, what was the reaction once you spoke to other teachers and school leadership?
The reaction varied, and a lot of teachers were aware of it. A lot of teachers were subjected to similar abuse, not necessarily of a religious nature, but similar abuse and similar intimidation tactics.
So a range of teachers knew of this problem. And
knew of the problems,
prevalence.
and knew of the problems emerging, and quite often there would be secret conversations behind closed doors. Support to me was done in secret. When I raised the issue, on one occasion I went into the staff room, this was when I actually had the written note towards myself and my family. When I went into the staff room and I raised it, on one occasion one teacher said, "Suck it up, princess," and another teacher just thought it was funny. It wasn't taken seriously, but then some other teachers brought me aside and were just absolutely horrified that this kind of thing was happening, and knew that it was getting out of control. Right,
and the school leadership or the Department of Education?
The school leadership, I don't think that at this time the school leadership, like, I can't speak for them, I can't speak for why they made decisions that they did. Perhaps we weren't prepared for this kind of behaviour that was coming. It's really difficult to say, like, why certain people did certain things. To me, no, the matter wasn't dealt with appropriately. I did try to contact the DET. I did try to report this to higher levels within the DET. Certain things happened. I believed at the time that this was following correct procedure. I'm not so sure. I handed the matter over like I was advised to, so I'm not quite sure if things were done correctly. But I don't feel now, and I didn't feel at the time, that the matter was being taken seriously.
Yeah, we've heard of the problems at Punchbowl Boys High. You're in a primary school. We hear talk of government-funded de-radicalisation programs in these government schools. What does that mean in practice? Did it apply in your school and did it have any impact?
It's interesting you actually bring up the de-radicalisation programs. I am aware that there was a group that was coming to our school and that group didn't turn up. Now I have
a group of de-radicalisation experts.
I've looked up this company or business, so to speak, and to find out why would they have been coming to our school, and I found out that they are a business that is part of the de-radicalisation programs. There was an appointment for them to come to our school and they didn't come. They pulled out. So I can't say for sure that they were coming there as a de-radicalisation program or if they were coming there for other purposes.
Right, so looking back, you felt fairly well stranded. The school wasn't ready for this. The teachers sound like they were a bit confused as to how to respond. The de-radicalisation experts didn't turn up. The school leadership didn't provide support and a program of pushing back against this behaviour. What about the parents of these students? What was their role?
The parents, whether they're contacted or not, teachers don't often know. So,
but the parents of these students, who are obviously doing something that most Australians would find horrific in a classroom at such a young age, they weren't active in terms of communicating with you or the school. A lot of parents take an interest. Were they interested parents?
A lot of parents do take an interest, and a lot of parents were saying that they don't want radicalisation occurring in the school. But then there's other parents who will just turn a blind eye and just do not want any interest. And usually, with a lot of matters to do with teachers, the blame is back onto the teacher.
Right.
So there were quite a few comments that had come up through the year. What can you do to stop this from happening? So it's always put back onto the teacher. What could you have done to stop this from happening? And it's like, I am trying. We have behaviour management strategies in place. I am doing my best. I am following procedures. It's not working.
Right. And was there ever a feeling among teachers or school leadership that that was sort of like a cultural sensitivity argument? Oh, these are Muslim kids, they're different. Look, we've got to sort of put up with this. That's the way they are. That's wrong. But was that sort of view put?
Absolutely. Okay. Right. I'm going to break it down a little bit for you. Okay. So in New South Wales, we have a system that's called Local Schools, Local Decisions. That empowers the school leadership to decide what will occur at their school. So if you are in a school where the leadership may be sympathetic to particular causes or particular ideologies, then that is where it ends. They get to make the decisions on what occurs in that school. So, and then on top of that, we have a system that my understanding is quite full of temporary and casual teachers. And if those teachers don't follow the ideology of what that school leadership is looking for, well, then you're out the door really quickly, because last I heard there's about 42,000 teachers awaiting a position. So if you don't toe the school line, so to speak, you're out the door. Right,
so there was a feeling of perhaps sweeping it under the carpet, tolerance, which was adding to the problem, and effectively you left not only disturbed by the behaviour that you saw,
I was left labelled a troublemaker.
Right, okay.
I was left labelled a troublemaker.
You thought it was wrong and said so.
Yep, I thought it was wrong, and I stood up, not just for me, not just for the other teachers, but for the students in the class as well. And I'm not talking just about Australian, and when I say Australian, I don't just mean the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, I mean all our students that are in class, and I mean the Muslim students as well. You know, this is about them as well, and a lot of them were expressing their discomfort at what was going on, and they didn't like what was going on, and they didn't support what was going on. But then you have some teachers and leadership who just seems to want to turn a blind eye to it, and then you have teachers who know that it's happening and want to support you but can't be seen to be supporting you either.
Yeah, Tanveer, you grew up in a devout Islamic family. You've had a lot of experience in Western Sydney professionally. What do you,
look,
how do you respond to
I'll give some broad points. So my background's sort of Bangladeshi Muslim, and depending on where you're from, it can have an impact. Look, I think about Muslims in Australia, we need to think of them in segments. So one, the skilled migrant group, in general, come from educated backgrounds. They've generally, like other skilled migrants, have integrated relatively well, socially mobile. Now, we've had very few problems around sort of crime, welfare fraud, more, less commonly terrorism. We've had very little of those sort of problems come out of that group. That's not to say you may not get, uncomfortable views in that group. They may well express sympathy for, say, the justifications or some of the reasons surrounding terrorism. But in terms of actually acting out or other sort of social problems, it's very rare in that group. Now, almost entirely the problems in Australia come from the unskilled refugee-derived Muslim, primarily from the Arab countries, primarily Lebanon, but increasingly Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, these kind of groups.
Right, and the school we're talking about here is in the Canterbury Bankstown
Absolutely, so it's
district,
primarily that Arab group. And the reason that's important is that it's not just about religion, it's also about class. So they're often coming from rural backgrounds, often from big families, often unskilled, and often, by and large, quite poorly educated too. So it's that group that's had, and sometimes from traumatic backgrounds too. So that group is the, sections of that group are the bits of, if you like, where problems have emerged, and significant problems, again, around welfare fraud, crime, and rarely terrorism. And so that, and what I think, Mrs. A, you've had a terrible time. So, I mean, listening to your stories, I mean, that's horrific. So to me, when I hear that, that has a lot to do with the rampant anti-social element within some of these communities that happens. And it's not entirely about religion. Partly that's about parenting. Partly it's about parenting boys and setting boundaries. And when that kind of goes wrong, you'll often have kind of absent dads in some ways, or all manner of things. Often they're on, in my practice at least, often they're injured or they're on disability pensions, etc. Those sort of things are very high amongst these groups. So you get an anti-social flavour that has the potential to interface with aspects of Islam. Now, at this age, they would have very little understanding of the broader meanings around what they're doing in terms of the Islamic theology. But what it's really about is almost a brand of Islam. So this group, young, say teenagers, etc., to them, it's really about oppositionality.
Well, they're not even that old. They're not even
teenagers.
We're talking
so to
11,
them, it's really about rampant. But already what they've absorbed is a sense that Islam is oppositional.
Right.
That it's oppositional to the West, and it's a way of going, stuff you. So that element has already, they've seeped in. It's seeped into them.
Well,
so
how big a worry is that? I mean, we talk about multiculturalism as ultimately people coming together around Australian values. If you've got a cultural or religious element that's oppositional at that age in a school where this is their big opportunity to actually take advantage of Australian education system and advance through our society, this oppositionalism is a terrible, terrible sign, isn't it, for the future once they get a bit older?
Well, it is very much a problem. Again, for the most part, that oppositional element is diluted as they get opportunities, they get jobs, they get degrees, etc. So for the most part, again, primarily in skilled migrants, but also in these groups too, for the most part, that is diluted. But there will certainly be segments. I mean, we've had plenty of people go to ISIS, be it on lots of those similar groups involved in crime. So for the most part, it's not necessarily channeled through religion. It's often more likely to be channeled through crime, etc. like that.
Well, Mrs. A, what do we do about it? In your direct experience, what do we do about this problem?
I actually agree with everything that you have said, and that's what I have found through my experience. And I think this is where the government and all governments, it's not just the Liberal government, it's not just the Labor government, it's all governments, all communities need to come together and set a level of standards and expectations and boundaries. Because from my experience in the Bankstown area, 10 years ago, we had a fantastic, strong Muslim leader, Jihad Dib, okay? And there were slight problems emerging, but Mr. Dib was a very strong leader. He was well respected, and it wasn't as bad as what it is now. Now, he's left, and he's gone off into politics himself, but it's created this vacuum, and where people are looking for leadership. Now, our system, I believe our system in school is one that is quite a socialist system. We focus so much on teaching just one R when there's actually 7 Rs. We focus on teaching all about rights and everybody's rights, but we're not focusing on teaching respect. We're not focusing on teaching responsibility. We're not focusing on teaching repercussions. And then after those, we've got the writing, the reading, and the arithmetic. So these students, they're not having any boundaries set for them.
All about human rights.
It's all about human rights.
Which
Give
can
me
be
my
taken
right.
advantage of,
Yep.
yeah.
And no one is saying no. Now everybody knows, no matter what religion you are, no matter what nationality you are, you need boundaries. Children need boundaries.
And you're listening to me say, I mean, often what I hear from teachers, and I have young kids at school, where over the recent decades they spend more and more time being parents rather than teachers. And so much of their time is trying to control. And this is the extreme end. So what you've really shown is the extreme end of that trend, where you have a group that it seems to be so poorly parented, have such poor boundaries, which are then unleashed onto an outsider, if you like, namely you, who they're basically showing no respect for, and then using bits of what they've heard around Islam as a kind of menacing way to kind of poke a stick at you.
What solutions would you recommend? What can be done?
Well, look, there's a social cause which most people don't live by religious text, right? But Muslims as a group, they're the one group in society that tends to become more religious in successive generations. So that's very unusual. Whereas every other group becomes more secular, right? And that has a lot to do with how they express identity. So often it's about, I don't feel like I entirely belong to the mainstream. This is the way I show my identity, right? Now that could be a problem, because the more people identify with Islam or Muslim as their primary identity, you know, as we have the Yasmin Abdul Majid thing, where I think she's very interesting because she's actually very transparent. She's sort of young and naive, and she's actually quite transparent. And it's actually how many Muslims actually think, but you know, won't necessarily say in public. So some of what she said about, you know, why aren't we thinking of Syria, Palestine? Good example have when they identify too closely with being a Muslim, they feel more connected with the so-called Ummah, like Muslims overseas.
Well, she was taking advice from Hizb ut-Tahrir.
Well, exactly.
How big a worry is
rather than feeling more connected to Australians. So at one level, it's about social. If most Muslims, if you give them jobs, opportunity, and Australia, as a general rule, it's not that hard to be Australian. Whereas I think for mainland Europe, etc., it's a lot tougher, where even skilled groups have felt like they're outsiders. So in Australia, if people are getting jobs, moving up the social ladder, by and large, any sense of opposition they have is steadily diluted.
Right, so breaking the cycle of welfare dependency, the area we're talking about,
longer term,
it's got a lot of welfare.
In the longer term, you cannot get rid of the inherent ideas in Islam.
And that requires reform of Islam.
Ultimately, that is still there, right? And those ideas are there and they're permanent. And I think until more Muslims come out and say, we cannot accept the Quran as the literal word of God. And this is what happened there's a precedent. It happened with Judaism, where they were like saying, well, it's not the literal word of God. It may be divinely inspired, if you like. Yeah, we can think that, but it's man-made. And that remains a huge stumbling block at the moment. So instead what happens now is, often Muslims go, oh, it's radicals hijacking the faith. I would say the opposite. What's actually happening is moderate Muslims overly sanitize the faith. Right. Totally against.
They need to stand up.
Totally against fact, and so they're in denial. That's my belief.
They need to create a reformation.
That's my belief. Whereas arguably radicals are they're closer to, you know, what's in front of them in a way. So you get all this denial, and part of the issue is because Muslims tie their identity so much to Islam, it's very hard then to debate the ideas in Islam, because they can't separate. They can't look, okay, here's the ideas. Anytime you try and question the ideas, they'll take it personally, go, you're attacking me personally. Right. And that makes it extremely hard to debate the issues.
Yeah. And Mrs. A, you've made an appointment later in the week to see the New South Wales Education Minister, Rob Stokes?
Yes. When the story first broke, I let it sit for a couple of days, and then I contacted his office, and I wanted to speak to him. I don't want to be fobbed off. And I think in light of what I had let out into the public, I think he had a responsibility to take that phone call. Unfortunately, he didn't. Someone else in his office took the phone call. So I've taken it upon myself to send him a written request that I would like a formal meeting with him. I don't want to do this sending a letter. I'm not being disrespectful to him. It's just that I have evidence that I need to show him, evidence that can't go into a letter. And I would like to sit with him face to face.
Yeah, well, he should. If the minister's fair dinkum, he'll meet with you. And you mentioned Jihad Dib, who had been the principal of Punchbowl Boys High School. He's become a Labor member of State Parliament and is actually the Shadow Minister for Education.
Yes.
So it might be worthwhile trying to meet with him as well, because he's obviously got the direct experience. He knows the school.
I know. I've actually worked in Punchbowl High. For another school that I was in, we were chosen teachers to actually go into the high school and assist the mathematics teachers just with different styles of teaching maths. So I have met Jihad, and I'd love to sit down and have a chat with him, because I don't think he'd be impressed with what's going on out in the wider area.
Pretty serious. I want to thank you for speaking out and for coming on our show to explain what's going on. And part of our role here is to get results, not just talk about things, get results. So if you can keep us up to date with the meetings you had with the Minister, I'd like to find out, I'm sure taxpayers, citizens, community members would like to find out, where are these de-radicalisation programs? Why weren't they in this school? Why weren't they getting results? We hear the propaganda that they're around. What's the reality at the coalface in the classroom? So, Mrs. A, you're a tribute to bravery and your role as a citizen. I want to thank you for coming on, and we look forward to getting an update as to progress with this issue. You're watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. We're going to now show our cartoon of the week, a change of pace. One of the great cartoonists around, Zeg, our cartoonist in resident, has sent this cartoon. He'll be doing this every week. It's me walking away from the Australian Labor Party. No surprise there. They've got the growling Albo, who thinks there are too many white people in Labor Party ads. He's an anti-white racist, and I've been banned there for life. That's a badge of honour for me. I'm happy to be with the Liberal Democrats on the basis that they're a party of freedom and free speech, against political correctness, against identity politics. That's where we want to be. So Zeg will be putting in a cartoon every week, just that visual image of the week in politics, thanks to his work. And we're going to have a change in panel. Thank Mrs. A again, and Corrine Barraclough will be coming in to talk about those other issues of importance. And just now we'll have a little presentation. One of the things about Mark Latham's Outsiders, I've been approached by so much talent around the country, anti-political correctness, anti-left feminism, anti-identity politics, anti all the bull dust that's circulating in the public debate. One of them is a YouTuber called Independent Man, a great guy, Independent Man. Have a look at his YouTube channel. He's put together a little presentation here called No Diversity for You, all the diversity bullcrap. He's down on it. Let's have a look at his video on YouTube, and when we come back we'll be talking to Tanveer and Corrine. Stay with us.
Thank you.
We hear a lot about diversity these days. It's one of the new religions adopted by the left. Not diversity of opinion, of course. No. The left's version of diversity is centred around the inclusion of the marginalised, which also somehow includes women. You see, if we could just remake our workplaces and societies over to look like a United Colours of Benetton catalogue, then we would reach that magic utopia. And of course, diversity, or a perceived lack of it, is often used as a club to beat us over the head with and remind us normies that we're all a bunch of
racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
And thanks to organisations like the ABC, they offer up examples of diversity for us normies to embrace, like friendly moderate Muslim faces like Yasmin Abdel-Magid. But let's switch this question of diversity around. How diverse, for example, is the Islamic community here in Australia? How accepting are they of voices that call for, say, a reform of Islam? You know, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Oh yeah, that's right. Well, she is a foreigner after all. How dare she come here and lecture us on what Islam should or shouldn't be?
Thanks for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. We're broadcasting, the image behind us is the Royal Hotel in Armidale in northern New South Wales, one of the great outsider watering holes. Hello to everyone at the Royal Hotel. We love Armidale, it's a great place. Got Barnaby Joyce as your local member, so he's politically incorrect, so we don't mind old Barnaby, even though he's a minority voice in the Turnbull government. Corrine Barraclough joins us. Corrine, thanks very much for all your work, not only being here tonight, but on the Facebook page and all the important articles you've been writing on the website about issues to do with the Child Support Agency, domestic violence, pushing back against lunatic and left feminists like Clementine Ford. I mean, she's so bad, we need people like you to remind us just how horrific that stuff is. So you're doing a great job, and at the Daily Telegraph. So thanks for being with us. We're going to have a talk about the federal budget, although I should point out, we just saw the little clip there, how good is Independent Man with his work and material. He included that grab from Hillary Clinton in the infamous deplorable statement. Well, I've got a reminder of that. In the Australian newspaper yesterday, Sam Dastyari described me as racist, Islamophobic, misogynist and a homophobe. Well, Sam, you left one out, deplorable. I'm not going to wear this. I want to be called a deplorable. You're going to have the whole list of Clintonite phobes related to me, homophobe, Islamophobe and all that. I want to be known as a deplorable as well. So silly Sam has left one out. He can do better than that. What about the federal budget? How did you see it, Corrine?
Do you know, the thing that really jumped out at me was the Centrelink and the drug testing. I think I get the impression that because there's been such a fierce spotlight on Centrelink over the last couple of months with the scandal, that they felt they had to do something. They've done something that's really drastic in saying that they're going to drug test. And I'm really interested to know then what? You know, what happens to those individuals?
What does happen if they test positive to cocaine or marijuana or something? What happens in the system? What's the promise from Scott Morrison's budget?
Are they actually are they actually going to help? Is some of that money? Well, he was asked if any money is going to then be put into rehab for them, and the answer was no. So what's the
plan to cut them off welfare?
That's it. So they have no money.
Well, most people would say they should. Instead of getting off their backside and getting a job, they're smoking the drugs and getting high.
It may be a stronger incentive to pursue treatment.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Because I think what happens is, look, it has overlaps with the law too. For example, you can't get a mental health defence purely on substance abuse, but you can. Often people, I mean, I would add, often people using drugs may also have a mental health condition.
The two are very, very close. Yeah.
I've definitely had patients who are quietly, you know, they're just smoking drugs or alcohol, etc., and no question they have problems. But I think this has the potential to give a shift. Whereas if they go on the disability pension, their incentive to improve is very limited. It's basically getting paid to take drugs. So I think it may help a set of people pursue treatment. It may change the incentive
So you're saying
structures.
it's better that they're regarded as active job seekers.
Yeah.
And if the drug habit's a barrier to getting the job, they'll get the treatment and then the pressure to actually
It's a stronger incentive. It's a bit like in the criminal justice system where you say, okay, yes, we can see that you have some problems, you use drugs, we won't send you to jail, but we'll mandate treatment. I think it has overlaps.
Well, I hope it works. I'm from the old kick 'em up the bum school of hard knocks, so we'll see if that works. What about the budget overall? I thought it was a demonstration of how Liberal and Labor have become so similar. It's almost like in Australia now we're a one-party state. It was a case of Malcolm Turnbull showing more of his true colours, that on funding the NDIS, education school funding, taking away some of the nasties in health, the fact that we're permanently in budget deficit, that the debt now, the debt ceiling has been lifted to $600 billion. It's more than $20,000 for every man, woman and child in Australia, a intergenerational debt legacy that'll take years, decades to pay off. It really was an old-fashioned Labor tax and spend budget, wasn't it? A few taxes there on the banks most notably, but spend, spend, spend. So politics now, it's become a one-party state, hasn't it?
That's right.
You're right, it could easily be a Labor budget, but what I found interesting, actually, that there are a few mental health angles there.
Yeah.
I'd say with the huge funding in the NDIS, big boost to veterans, and look, it's very hard to, you know, look, I'm all for veterans, but this comes out in some of my work. Whereas I do feel like we are almost heading into this society where you've got a certain group, it might be a third of taxpayers, paying more and more and more tax. And then you've got a big group of people. And remember, even disability is shifting from, say, bad backs to troubled minds. Like they say the disability pension 20 years ago might have been bad backs. Increasingly, it's mental health. So you almost have this Western world now where larger and larger portions of the population have this sort of label put on themselves. And there's increasingly incentives in an industry to do so. That I'm disabled due to mental health reasons, for PTSD, for example, that's an industry that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
How fair dinkum is it, Tanveer? Because in your book, I was very much drawn to this example you gave. You said a patient in a regional town arrived. He'd been in the Navy and he said he was suffering psychological injury while serving in the Australian Navy. And you write, I imagine breathtaking tales of battle, perhaps firing cannons or watching missiles batter neighbouring ships. It emerged he was a kitchen hand, working in the canteen of one of the battleships, and he felt unfairly criticised by his boss for the way he prepared the food. Well, he burnt the schnitzel, and that qualified him for a mental illness and some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder. This is all just baloney,
Look,
isn't
the
it?
reality, if you work in the police, the army, or the paramedics, almost anything that goes wrong in your life, you can blame that experience. And I think the therapeutic industry, it's very hard to convince, say, a GP or a psychologist that you suffered some sort of trauma. Now, in the last 10, 15 years, the vast majority of our servicemen have not seen frontline duty. They have not seen
This
action.
guy ended up on a pension, didn't he?
Absolutely.
The
He's
cook,
still on it. He's
the
still
cook
on
who
it.
burnt the
Yes,
schnitzel
absolutely.
ended up on a
As soon as
pension.
they're on it. He's been on it for 30 years. And that's not uncommon. So that's very common. Because, look, again, like I'm all for supporting veterans. One aspect of this budget which I find interesting is that they've taken out an onus to prove liability for certain elements of veteran. And to me, that gave me danger signs, i.e. something, you can have some sort of problem or distress and you don't even have to prove that it was actually linked to your service. This is what the bigger issue is that we're getting now with PTSD in particular. Lawyers love PTSD, and I'll tell you why. It's the only mental health condition that is directly linked to cause. Everything else, the actual diagnosis isn't linked to cause. PTSD is. So the rise in compensation, now more and more veteran payments, and it is becoming a big industry, and it's a bigger kind of comment on Western society.
How can government control the cost of this national disability insurance scheme? You add up all the people who've got genuine depression, people real mental health, plus the so-called anxiety epidemic, plus Asperger's, autism spectrum, people with physical disabilities, everyone is on the disability support pension. It's about 15–20% of the population. How can government control this when inevitably there'll be so many pressures on your local member of parliament who people come to say, oh, my child has just missed out on the spectrum of being categorised as disabled. I mean, the political electoral instinct will be to allow more categories and more people in. And unfortunately, we'll find that by spreading those resources so thinly, that the real disabled need in Australia, the people who've got severe disabilities, won't get the resources they need.
Well, that is
under
the risk.
scheme.
So increasingly, we are diluting the actual meaning of mental illness. Because now, I mean, almost every week, I will have kids from wealthy private schools wanting disability provisions to do their exams at schools, for example. And often they do have an anxiety disorder, etc., and you can tick the boxes to give them provisions like extra time, or they might have a support person, etc. So increasingly, we have all these incentives in our society to be disabled in some form. And one of the most subjective, easiest way to be potentially disabled is around mental health diagnosis, because it's highly subjective. It's an extension of distress more generally. So there's a very grey line between. So as soon as there's incentives to fall in that line, it's a gimme.
Well, one of the mental health problems in Canberra is in the Australian Labor Party, where they've got a derangement syndrome called anti-white racism. Now, we saw it in the ludicrous debate about an ad. It looked an innocuous ad to me. It was about the 457 visas. Bill Shorten got in all sorts of trouble. Anthony Albanese calling him out. Not enough brown-skinned people, not enough so-called diversity. Too many white people in the ad. Let's have a look at it.
I'm worried about jobs for our kids in the future. There are many jobs that should go to Australians first, but the Liberals and Nationals say Australians lack the skills. So those jobs are going to 457 overseas workers. But the jobs are here, and the people who want the jobs are here. If it's really about skills shortages, we need to connect the two. Labor will connect available jobs to TAFE training. A shortened Labor government will build Australian first, buy Australian first, and employ Australians first.
Authorised by N. Carroll, ALP Canberra.
Ridiculous that you're going to have an ad that says Australians first. They all look like legitimate workers. I don't know if they're paid actors or not, but they look like workers, don't they? They've got the vests on and they look at all the gear. They look like workers. And it's ridiculous to say we're going to have Australians first, but then Labor says, oh, sorry, they've got the wrong skin colour. We needed some non-white people in the ad. So those Australians presenting there as workers adversely affected by the 457s, which is a real issue, those Australians go out. They end up running last, because the diversity culture says for the sake of skin colour, some people... Tanveer, you should have been in the ad, mate. You should have had a go.
Look, personally, I do agree with presenting a modern face of Australia. So in that respect, I don't entirely disagree that they should have had a wider group of, not just brown faces.
They just need to be workers. They just need to be workers,
I think it's reasonable that you present the modern picture of Australia. And really, if you go outside in most parts of Australia, there will be a wider variety of faces, right? The other aspect the other reason I think wider variety of faces is important is that I think we keep pushing the idea that the working class is all white. And that's not true.
No, that's not true.
I've got all these patients, they're from they're Vietnamese, they're Cambodian, working as asbestos workers, they're Mediterranean, all manner of stuff. So I think we need to get away from that too. I think we often present this image that the working class, it's all kind of white.
If they're the workers they found affected by the 457, why does it matter about skin colour or how they look? Their impact is these are people who are going to lose their jobs, they've been adversely affected by the foreign workers coming in, and you don't need to jig it up to have a certain representation of skin colour, if they're the workers that you've got, I think the average Australian would think, well, I'm judging them as workers, as people who've been disadvantaged, not on their skin colour. So I think it was kind of crazy.
Yeah, I think it was overblown. I think it was overblown, but at the same time, I think I certainly believe that you can present a modern face of Australia regardless.
Well,
now,
they look like modern Australians to me because they're real live Australians. Corrine, what did you make of it?
Do you know, I think it's a mountain out of a molehill, honestly. Are we going to end up at a position where we have to have such a wide mix of people that you're casting for that? So where's your token this, where's your token this, X, Y, Z, have you ticked all the boxes?
I always look for the token poor person, because the modern Labor Party talks about, we need racial judgments, the needs of women, the needs of gays, the needs of Muslims. What about poor people? Modern Labor doesn't talk about poor people. I mean, the whole purpose of the Labor Party was social justice based around income levels, socio-economic factors. And when you get off onto this identity politics, you lose sight of the thing that's most important in the fairness of society, to lift people up out of poverty. All this sneering and judgment on identity politics has distracted Labor from its historic task of helping the poor.
Well, you're about to shift to the Sam Dastyari
ad
now. That's perfect timing.
Yep, absolutely. Talking of sneering, it's sneering Sam Dastyari. This is what he thinks of people in Western Sydney if you live in a house that's not a harbourside mansion.
This is what $1 million in Sydney will buy you. This, what's called a classic house in the suburb of Ryde, immaculately kept as it's been told, on one of the busiest roads of Sydney to boot. And you know if it's got security shutters, you're onto a good thing. People like to talk about how a generation of young people are being picky. We are an hour and 20 away in peak hour traffic from the CBD of Sydney, and all $1 million will buy you is essentially a block of land across the road from not only a power station, but also the train line. And all you're really paying for is the chance to spend another couple $100,000 to build something. This is what $1 million will buy you in Northmead, but it's okay, because it's described as having a functional kitchen. For a fucking $1 million, you'd like to think the kitchen can work.
Well, you'd also like to think, Sam Dastyari, that Labor people would have a bit more compassion and common sense than racing around sneering at people. Some of them in Labor electorates. I don't know what Julie Owens thinks of the house in Toongabbie that was sneered at. She's the member for Parramatta. The senators in her electorate sneering at working people who've raised the family, done well. We hear in the media that those people are pushing back. And the truth is, Dastyari is an example of what's gone wrong, not only with the Labor Party, but aspects of multiculturalism. His family came here in 1988, radicals from Iran. They did well, set up a Michelle's cake shop. Young Sam had all the opportunities that the Australian society can provide, went through a selective high school, through university, promoted through the Labor Party, became a senator. And he's turned around sneering, abusing people because they're white, and then getting out into Western Sydney to sneer at homes because they've got the shutters down the front or they've got the furniture out the front. Well, these are people the Labor Party used to care about. Not to be sneered. Where's this elitism come from in the Labor Party? I can't believe you've got people like Dastyari. I was on a TV show earlier this year. Dee Madigan, who reckons she's of the left, was laughing at the concept of disadvantaged men. They're laughing and sneering at people who haven't got the money and resources and elitism that they've got. The Labor Party has totally lost the plot.
I think what you said earlier is right. Social justice has become something else. You know, it's been totally hijacked by SJW's social justice warriors, and it's morphed into something actually quite terrifying and lost the plot of where it should be, as you say.
Basically, the left has shifted. I mean, I'll make a point. I grew up in Toongabbie, so I know the place.
Is that your place?
Yeah, that's my old house, I think. But I mean, look, the left has basically shifted from previously representing the working classes to now representing professionals and minority groups. So Dastyari is a great example of that. And that's the crisis of the left.
Well, he just seems to me, he's totally ungrateful about the opportunities this country has.
Well, his take is, I was shining a light on the property crisis. Like, nobody's doing that.
Yeah,
like,
well, you've only got to read the newspaper or go to an auction and look at the prices. But the other thing about that, there were two sad things about that video in full length. One was he had some young Labor people there teaching them how to sneer. They were badly influenced by this fool. And the second bad thing was there was no policy content. It was like some sort of slapstick comedian racing around with his Bill Shorten bus with no policy solution. It was like a non-political thing on a B-grade
Just a bit of a
comedy
whinge.
show,
Just
like
a
on
whinge.
the weekly on the ABC.
Yeah.
Maybe he's auditioning for something at the public broadcaster where they probably think the sun shines out of his ass, whereas your average Australian would think he's a total fool.
He's totally and utterly smug, but he's definitely angling for his own show, I think.
Well, he won't get it here at Mark Latham's Outsiders. That's the big news, sneering Sam. He won't get a break here. But Corrine, we've been very grateful on the platform, the website and the Facebook page to be reading your stuff. I know from my time as a Member of Parliament, a lot of men have got legitimate grievances about the operation of the Child Support Agency. You've spoken about a concept called financial abortion, where basically you're saying a man having sex with a woman is not signing up for a lifetime of financial commitments if she happens to fall pregnant. So you've had some feedback about it. You've put forward some solutions. Can you explain what you think needs to happen with this agency of child support?
Yeah, I think to start with, we need to keep in mind that this is an agency that's been set up since the 1980s. Times have changed a lot. We're in 2017, and let me tell you a real life story that I think really puts this in context. It's a real life story of a guy from New South Wales who I did the story for news.com. He met a girl on Facebook. They were chatting back and forth. After a couple of months, they met up. They had a drunken night together on a Saturday. He drove home on the Sunday. He tried to call her that week and she didn't respond. And he, at that point, thought, okay, she's not interested. He got a phone call when he was sat at his desk at work 12 weeks later from her saying, I'm pregnant.
Right, so the drunken night.
The drunken night,
ended in
12
sex.
weeks later,
Right.
yep. 12 weeks later, that's the first that he had heard from her, I'm pregnant. His response was, are you sure it's mine? I think he can be forgiven for that.
Well, of course, natural response.
Yep. And she hung up. So that was it. So this poor guy is left hanging, tries to contact her, hears nothing. The next he hears is a knock at the door, at his door at home, when his son was 9 months old. And that was from someone serving papers for a DNA test. And pending the results of that, the CSA then involved. He's been paying 100% child support for a child that he has never met. And this is a woman that he had, they weren't in a relationship. This is a one-night stand. There's no feminist in the world that can tell me that a one-night stand is consenting to fatherhood.
A one-night stand where she's not given him any information or treated him decently and he's never met the child.
Absolutely. It's shocking, but I think that it puts into context what we're actually dealing with. You know, society has changed so much. We're in 2017 where people are swiping left, swiping right and swiping everything off several times a week. The policy has got to actually catch up with that.
Okay, so you're recommending that in his circumstances the child support arrangement shouldn't apply?
Look, I think as a woman, I think that's a shocking decision. And totally, you know, we're at a point, women have all the rights. You know, as a woman, yes, it's your body. Yes, you have the right to choose. And yes, that's absolutely the way that it should be. But men have absolutely no rights. In what world does having a child then turn into like a supermarket sweep where
that guy
I'll
would feel
take
totally
the child
gutted by the system and by what happened to him. But where do you draw the line? What's the point at which the financial arrangement is decoupled from the act of sex that they had?
Well, it obviously has to be very early on. And look, there would be a lot of nitty-gritty to map out, but I think that story really highlights this isn't just an issue that you can just bat away. You know, the feminist response to that was any man having sex is consenting to parenthood. I absolutely...
No, it's ridiculous.
It's totally... and it's really demeaning to people that actually put thought into becoming a parent, you know. The good fathers out there.
Well, you could have 30 or 40 kids if you're a sort of good-looking bloke, active when you were young. I mean, I'm not saying I was in that category, but you start to worry. So, what's the sort of feedback you've had?
You know, I was absolutely inundated. Look, people are jumpy about the term financial abortion. I think it sounds very out there.
It sounds harsh.
It sounds, it does. Yeah. It does. And the thought that men could be signing away and walking away and leaving women stranded, you can see that side to it. But look, I think what really came out of it was then moving that conversation to the CSA, which has a foul reputation for using really grim bullying tactics. And that goes from calling out of hours, calling at weekends, repeatedly harassing people. And these aren't, you know, the media likes to portray these men as deadbeat dads. That it's so insulting. It's so insulting. These are often people that are trying as hard as they can. And I think one of the things that came up when we were looking at maybe top 5 suggestions for CSA reform was this concept that the CSA is solely focused on collecting money. It's like a debt collecting agency. It has absolutely no follow through to fathers or mothers seeing their children. If there is court-ordered access, ordered by the court, that parent should get to see the child that they're paying for.
Yeah, it's access, but I always found as a Member of Parliament there was a financial imbalance. There were a lot of men who'd say, we broke up, you know, I like to see my kids and I love them as much as I can. The wife has remarried into a much wealthier circumstance, good luck to her, but why am I paying money for the kids when they're richer than me? Yeah. You see, the financial imbalance is annoying, that they're doing a lot better than me. Why am I contributing to a wealthy family because of the parental responsibility? Well, you can argue, well, it is a responsibility, but common sense would dictate if the family is earning 5 times more than the father making the financial contribution, maybe it's time to call off. Do you know, off the system.
Yeah, I think so. And also I think the worrying thing, and I could probably get away with saying this as a woman, is this crazy sense of female entitlement. You're not entitled to use a man as an ATM for 18 years. It's just because you can doesn't always mean that you should. And where is the common sense, as you would say, or the doing the right thing in that? Yeah,
it's the problem of the state, of government drawing up rules, regulations, strict guidelines, and not having the flexibility to adapt to real life human circumstances, because each of these stories, you know, the child support stories often are heartbreaking in their detail. Often, you know, it's not just the wife's remarried into the wealthier arrangement, but they've moved, you know, they've gone to the other side of the country. And what does the dad do? He's paying the money for no access to the kids, you know, he's a battler, he can't afford the flights over to other
Perth.
side of it, Perth, or coming the other way. So it just ends up stories that break your heart.
And you know, they're not rare. And every time I write in this area, I get absolutely inundated with messages. And I think that's you can't look at these issues in isolation. If we're serious about male suicide, we have to take this issue seriously, because the knock-on effect of it would affect people's mental health. And that has a dramatic impact on the male suicide rate, which is out of control. And if we're saying as a country that that is a concern, we have to look at the CSA.
Well, it's a concern, of course, but it doesn't fit the gender paradigm, does it? The gender theory mob sneer at this. You know, we showed a few shows ago the Democrat Party in the United States, in the state of Maine. The guy made the presentation. He's heard that white men are committing suicide. That means they can't vote for Donald Trump in the future, and the gathering laughed. You know, we talk about left-wing sneering. This is sort of sick sneering. But that attitude, I'm not saying people here are laughing, but the male suicide problem, Tanveer, it's not getting much focus, is it, in terms of real life focus?
There's almost a danger about it. You're right, like I've spoken about, etc. It has to be done almost with care, because you immediately starts getting brushed with the so-called men's rights movements, etc.
Well, what's wrong with that? Men have got rights.
Absolutely. So I think a lot of that. But look, that's where Trump came from. Arguably, the last half century, the idea at the root of progressivism was partly about shifting traditional masculinity away from the public sphere, right? It was about kind of diluting it, pushing it out, and it had a deeper psychological level. It was really seen that traditional masculinity was sort of primitive, and as we became more and more civilized, more and more kind of rational and kind of, you know, these superior kind of beings, that part of humanity would just be kind of quashed. So, you know, Trump's the antithesis of that. So a lot of the movements we've had institutionally is about snuffing out traditional, and you've been a sufferer of that too. So in some ways, even in public life, if you're traditionally masculine, there's often, you know, there's a blowback against that in some ways.
This is where the rancid term toxic masculinity has come from, which I just think is such a sexist term to use. Masculinity is beautiful. If you can't see that, you need some rewiring and you've been brainwashed, you know.
So in my work, I say that all the time. Often men will present in different ways. They might come through the legal justice system or through their work or through drug and alcohol problems. So they won't present in the same way that women do. They're less likely to seek help through that realm. Even our diagnostic symptoms in mental health, they're kind of almost geared to women presenting in things like depression, etc. So there's all these things that discriminate against men, and I think it's a massive problem. And look, obviously, Corrine's written about things like domestic violence. There's a huge myth that about gender, being at the base of these problems. And even when I think all of us have written about the very possibility of male disadvantage, and there's this utter blowback, which is rooted in a primitive kind of thing. It's not rooted in fact.
Yeah. Well, in terms of masculine conflict, there's news in the last 48 hours. Alan Joyce, the head of Qantas, copped a pie in the face in Perth. He's been out there campaigning as a quasi-politician. He doesn't really present solely as a corporate leader these days, a quasi-politician on the issue of same-sex marriage. Let's have a look at what happened at that breakfast in Perth yesterday morning when a traditional marriage supporter gave him a lemon meringue pie right in the gob.
Since I've been here to announce the heck. I don't know what that was about. Excuse me. I might take a break for a second, guys, and just clean up a little bit. Well, I've been CEO of Qantas now for close to 9 years, and it was a new experience. Here to announce the heck. Here to announce the heck.
I'm sorry, Alan, but that's fair dinkum hilarious. But that's politics. You go out campaigning on these political issues. The old guy, apparently 67 years old, a pensioner in Perth, a supporter of traditional marriage, which, after all, is still the law of the land. Let's not forget that it's still a statute law to be respected in this country. And the old guy, I heard him on radio today, said that he selected a lemon meringue pie because he thought it was the softest one, that he wouldn't hurt little Joycey with the lemon meringue pie, as opposed to what an old stale 20-year-old pork pie, which would have knocked him out, would have knocked Joyce out. So I just think it's ridiculous that Alan Joyce has decided to press charges. Maybe they're planning to lock this guy up for what is a pretty innocuous political protest. Joyce hasn't been harmed in any way. He's only as big as a leprechaun, but I mean, he wasn't knocked over by it, and the guy was considerate enough to have the soft pie. And wouldn't you think Alan Joyce would just back off and say,
if he wants to play politics, this is what politicians have to face. And no politician would sue if they copped a pie or something.
You wouldn't even think about it. You wouldn't even think about it. I've been there, and I haven't copped the pie in the face. I've copped a lot of other stuff. But you wouldn't think, your mind wouldn't turn to the idea.
John Howard had a shoot thrown at him. He's not running off trying to sue them.
No, Howard didn't. And your mind would not turn instinctively to pressing charges.
Yeah.
How precious is this guy? I mean, why not just laugh and get on with the job?
It's interesting that both of you have used the word copped a pie, and the reporting yesterday was all very much hit with a pie in the face, which I think is really telling in itself. He was pied. He copped a pie. He wasn't hit in the face with a pie.
No, he wasn't. So come on, Alan Joyce, don't lock up a 67-year-old who just had a little... You've been out campaigning, and quite truthfully, the militant gay left have been running people out of the workplace because they're Christians who believe in traditional marriage. We had that terrible incident with Coopers where 2 members of Parliament couldn't sit down, have a beer and have a civilised debate about this issue. The militant gay left have been out there disgracing our democracy, and the fact that they're all got their knickers in a knot over this 67-year-old with the soft lemon meringue pie.
It's far worse threatening people's livelihood than getting a bit of meringue in your face.
Yeah, well, Alan, mightn't be the only pie you get, mate. If you carry on and try and jail this bloke, then we'll all be chucking stuff at you. So pull your head in and be fair dinkum, be fair. You're a very wealthy man. You've got a great job. You don't need to be doing this to the fellow. And at the end of the day, what's the worst? If the worst thing that ever happened to me in politics was someone hit me with a pie, if only that had been the case. So Tanveer and Corrine, thanks very much for being here this evening. We're up against the clock right now. Thanks to our viewers for watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. If you can help us, don't forget the support page, support.marklathamsoutsiders.com. We'll be back next Wednesday night at 8 p.m. to present another show that gives you all the good guff with no PC, no punches pulled, no language controlled whatsoever. But as I did with the preview show, some 2 hours ago, I want to leave you with what I think is one of the most powerful speeches I've seen in recent times. 10 days ago, I was at the Liberty Conference in Sydney, associated with my new political party, the Liberal Democrats, and Callum Thwaites spoke. You might know that name. Callum was one of the students persecuted by the Human Rights Commission out of the 18C controversy at the Queensland University of Technology. I mentioned earlier, Callum was not contacted by a single Labor Member of Parliament, state or federal, was not contacted publicly or privately to say, Callum, you've been totally mistreated here. The truth is Callum wasn't involved in the incident where the white students were kicked out of the Indigenous lab because of their skin colour. He didn't actually post anything on Facebook. There was a fake account where he was fitted up for that. He didn't do anything. He didn't do anything, yet he was hauled over the coals by the Human Rights Commission. His university let him down. He had costs. He had to redirect his career. I mean, if you want to know what's gone wrong in modern Australia in terms of abuse of state power and this crazy outfit, the Anti-Human Rights Commission, listen to this speech. If you've got 10, 12 minutes, listen to this speech. This tells you more about modern Australian politics than just about anything. Listen to Callum Thwaites. It's a powerful, amazing presentation by a brave, strong young man who I think was awarded by the Australian newspaper Australian of the Year. That was justice being done after a terrible injustice at the hands of various public institutions. We'll see you next week and leave you with the wonderful Callum Thwaites.
Well, thank you all for being here so early on Sunday morning. My name is Callum Thwaites, and I'm going to start with something that someone said to me last time I was in Sydney, celebrating the life of a great man, and that was that he shouldn't know my name. And I agree. He should not, and you should not know my name. I should not be here today talking to you. I should be in Brisbane. I should be at the end of my studies, and I should be months from becoming a high school teacher. But I'm not. That's not how my life has panned out. That's not how the world has played out. Instead, my life took a sharp right turn that started on the 28th of May, 2013. I study at the Queensland University of Technology, or QUT, and on the 28th of May, 3 students, one of whom is Alex Wood, an engineering student, went into a computer lab at the Brisbane campus of QUT. Alex and his 2 friends had no idea that the room they walked into was an unsigned, Indigenous-only computer lab. Shortly after entering, quietly, peacefully, and sitting down, a staff member came up to Alex and his friends and asked them if they were Indigenous. They weren't, and they said no. She told them that they weren't allowed to use these facilities, they were for Indigenous students only, and they had to leave. So he did. 45 minutes or so later, after finding another computer, Alex posted on Facebook. In a Facebook group, he said the following: "Just got kicked out of the unsigned Indigenous computer room. QUT stopping segregation with segregation, ... This led to a long string of comments from students at QUT and non-students alike. People were discussing whether or not an Indigenous-only computer lab is a good policy. Some people asked in humour, why is it that it's okay to have an Indigenous-only room, but not a white supremacist-only room? And among these comments was a sole comment from a Facebook account portraying itself as me. This isn't, as some ill-informed commentators have tried to say in the past, a hacking. This was a case of a stolen identity. So I'd like to believe that this person that used my name and my picture was trying to catfish people. I doubt it. It was probably not that sophisticated. It was probably just a shitty practical joke. Not too long after Alex's post blew up, the staff member who kicked him out was informed about the post by some students. She decided that because she kicked Alex out of the room and because she is Indigenous, the comments were about her. The jokes about white supremacy weren't jokes about white supremacy to show the absurdity of the policy. They were code for an underground white supremacist movement that now had her in their sights. How she came to this view, when she was never named, never mentioned, is something that we'll probably not know. So she complained to the director of her unit and then to the director of equity at QUT. And she made it very clear that this must be taken further And the students who participated and those who simply liked the posts must be reprimanded in some way. Those are her words, not mine. So the university contacted a number of the commentators, not all of them, not everyone was a student at QUT, not everyone has a name like Callum Thwaites. Some, for example, have a name like Chris Lee, who also commented on this post and has never been found. This is when I first found out that I'd supposedly made an offensive comment on Facebook. And I was told to remove it. Well, I wrote back, I don't know what you're talking about. And I think you've got the wrong person. So the university told me, oh, don't worry about it. You've got assessment to deal with. We'll look into this. And of course I went, okay, that's fine. You're my university, you've got my back. Little did I know I should have been really worried. So this staff member took such offence to these posts that she took time off work from the 29th of May, indefinitely. She went on workers' compensation while QUT was trying to manage her complaint, which involved changing the unsigned computer lab into a signed swipe card access computer lab, to security patrols, to public statements about the unit. But they tried this for a year, and on the 27th of May in 2014, on the last day of the time period that she could do it, she lodged a complaint with the Australian Human Rights Commission alleging racial vilification under Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. She claimed that these comments offended, insulted, humiliated and intimidated her based solely on her race. This complaint was made against QUT, 2 staff members and 7 students, and one of them was me. Now, instead of getting, as you would expect, our involvement in the process to see what happened and what we think, her lawyers requested that the AHRC not notify the students because they were hopeful of settling with QUT. Both the AHRC and QUT said, okay, we agree to this, and left all of the students and the 2 staff members in the dark. This lasted for 14 months, until the 28th of July in 2015, when not the Human Rights Commission, but QUT themselves, out of the blue, emailed me to let me know that A, there was a complaint against me alleging racial vilification, B, the complaint had gone so far as the Australian Human Rights Commission, and C, there was a conciliation conference on the 3rd of August that I could attend if I would like. So instead of having 14 months like the Australian Human Rights Commission had to deal with the complaint, or 26 months like the university had to deal with the complaint, I had 3 business days. As an education student who's never read law before in his life. Some of the other students didn't even find out about the conference and never knew it was happening. I mean, that seems fair. That seems fair, right? So as you can imagine, the conciliation conference achieved nothing. And in October, the complaint became a case in the Federal Circuit Court of Australia. And along with the documents for court, I received a letter that gave me the option of, instead of paying this woman $250,000 that she wanted, I could pay her $5,000 and we would confidentially settle and I wouldn't be called a racist. 3 students took this option and I don't blame them. Well, I didn't have $5,000. I'm not from a well-off family. My father is self-employed, and that puts food on the table. That's about it. My mother had recently moved to Maryborough, which is 3.5, 4 hours out of Brisbane, to care for her mother. And I was an unemployed education student that would get $50 every now and again to tutor someone in maths. But even if I had the money, I'm not really sure that I should pay someone for something that I didn't do. So I stood my ground and I represented myself. Thankfully, I was saved from this terrible decision by the good graces of Tony Morris QC. And to be perfectly honest, without him, I don't know where I would be today. but it would not be here. So we got the cases against myself, Alex Wood, and a third student, Jackson Powell, thrown out of the court. We got her attempt to appeal thrown out of the court. And we've helped to show the population that 18C is a perverse encroachment on freedom of speech, and that the AHRC are the gatekeepers who decide what you can and can't say, what you can and can't write, what you can and can't draw. So what is freedom of speech? And why is it so damn important? This is something I've been grasping at for about 6 months now. I'm not a libertarian. I'm not really a political monster. Well, I wasn't. It's taken me a long time to get to this point. And if you'd asked me this 6 months ago, I would have been, look, free speech is important, but how important? I believe wholeheartedly in free speech now, and I will defend it to my end. We have to have the freedom to express, the freedom to discuss, to debate, and most importantly, to disagree. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom from critique, freedom from criticism, or freedom from offence. If we can't express views that might be critical of others or their ideas, or a view that could offend, we can't express anything. And how can we share ideas in a world where the very sharing of the ideas is stifled? We need to be able to hold government and institutions to account when they're creating policy that's bad or wrong, like a separate room for Indigenous people only. No whites allowed. How can we stop these ideas if we cannot be free to talk about them, regardless of the offence that might be taken? Thank you.